The first thing you noticed about Dry Creek wasn't the people. It wasn't the saloon, nor the church, nor the hitching posts lined with horses whose heads hung low from long days of work. No, the first thing you noticed was the dust. Dust that lifted with every step, every wheel, every hoof. Dust that settled into your teeth and made every swallow bitter. Dust that never seemed to leave, no matter how many times you washed your face. It clung to the town like a second skin, a reminder that this was a place carved out of stubbornness rather than promise. Dry Creek was the kind of town where people didn't stay unless they had nowhere else to go. Ranchers who'd lost everything to drought, miners who'd been chased from richer hills, widows who couldn't afford the luxury of moving on. They all stayed, not out of love, but because the land itself seemed to hold them captive. And on the edge of this town stood the old ranch, a ranch that had once been whispered about as a jewel of the valley. They said its pastures had been green once, its cattle fat, its barns filled with grain and laughter. But those were stories from 20 years back, before the storms, before the sickness, before the soil cracked and the water vanished. Now the place was nothing but a scar. The main house leaned like an old drunk too stubborn to fall. The roof was a map of holes. The barn doors swayed as if pushed by hands that weren't there. Every window was broken, jagged teeth of glass catching the dying sun. And the well, once the pride of the land, stood sealed with rotting boards as if someone had buried something inside it. No one wanted that ranch, and no one would have it, except Elias Crow. He rode into Dry Creek one evening with no fanfare. His horse was bony, its ribs showing through its hide, but it carried him with the kind of determination only a man and beast shared after years of survival. Elias himself looked little better, tall, broad-shouldered, but worn thin by miles, of road and weight of memory. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and his jaw carried days of unshaven stubble. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. When word spread that the county office had sold him the abandoned ranch for $1, the town buzzed. At the saloon, laughter spilled louder than the whiskey. $1, one man shouted. Hell, they ought to pay him just to set foot, out there. Another smirked. $1 for a curse. That's all he bought. Even the barkeep, who'd seen enough hard men come and go, muttered under his breath, That place'll eat him alive. But Elias Crow wasn't listening. He didn't drink. He didn't gamble. He didn't linger in town. Whatever ghosts had driven him this far, they were pushing him toward silence, not company. And that ranch, rotted, forgotten, cursed, was the quietest place Dry Creek had left. The first time he rode out to see it, the road stretched longer than he remembered. The prairie grass was brittle, breaking under the hooves of his horse. Hawks circled above, waiting for something to die. The wind carried the faint smell of old fire, though no smoke lingered. When he reached the gates, they hung broken, chains, rusted, wood splintered. He dismounted, the earth crunching beneath his boots, and walked forward with the deliberate pace of a man measuring every step. His hand brushed the gate post. It crumbled slightly under his touch. He studied the house, from a distance, and for the briefest moment he thought he saw a flicker of movement in the upstairs window, a shadow that disappeared before his eyes could confirm it. He narrowed his gaze but said nothing. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with dust. Cobwebs stretched across the doorframe, snapping softly as he pushed his way through. Each step echoed, floorboards groaning in protest. He traced his hand along the walls, the wood still carrying faint scars of lives once lived, scratches where a table had been pushed, dark marks where oil lamps once burned. Something unsettled him. It wasn't just the silence. It was the feeling that the silence was being held, as though the house itself was waiting. He climbed the stairs, his boots pressing into the wood with a sound that felt louder than it should have. Halfway up, he paused. There it was again. A creak. Soft. Deliberate. not the sound of the house settling, the sound of a step. His hand slid to the revolver holstered at his side. He didn't draw it, not yet, but the weight of it against his palm gave him steadiness. He pushed on. The upstairs hallway was narrow, dust motes floating in the dying light. He could hear it now, a shuffle, faint but unmistakable. A breath, quick and shallow. He pushed open the door, and there she was. Girl, standing near the broken window, hair tangled, face smudged with dirt. She couldn't have been more than 15 or 16, though the way she clutched the satchel against her chest made her look younger. Her eyes locked on his, wide, unblinking, like an animal cornered. Elias froze. He had expected rats, maybe snakes, but not her. Slowly, he raised the revolver, though his voice came out quieter than he intended. "What are you doing in my house?" The girl didn't flinch at the sight of the gun. She didn't scream, didn't beg. She just stared at him, breathing hard, her lips trembling as she forced a single word out. Mine. And in that single word, spoken with a defiance that didn't match her frail frame, Elias Crow understood. The ranch he thought he had bought for $1 already belonged to someone else. Elias Crow stood frozen in the doorway, his revolver raised but his will uncertain. The girl didn't move. She didn't scream. Her small frame looked fragile, but her eyes burned like embers that refused to die out. "Mine," she'd said. The word echoed in the hollow room, louder than it had any right to be. Elias's jaw tightened. He was not a man used to hesitation. Yet here he stood, staring at a slip of a girl who guarded the wreck of a ranch like it was a fortress of gold. He lowered the gun, slightly, but not all the way. His voice came out rough, years of road dust, etched into every word. "This land was sold, signed over to me by the county, cost me $1. That makes it mine." The girl's chin lifted. Dirt streaked across her cheeks, but her defiance made her look carved from stone. "No papers, no county. This house is mine." Her words weren't shouted. They were whispered, but with a conviction that rooted deep. Elias studied her, noting the thinness of her arms, the hollows beneath her eyes, the way her clothes hung loose like they belonged to someone larger. She had been here a long while, longer than the laughter in the saloon suggested anyone could survive. Silence stretched. Only the wind outside rattled against the window frame. Finally, Elias stepped into the room, his boots groaning against the wood. He holstered his revolver, though he never took his eyes off her. "You got a name?" The girl hesitated. Her fingers gripped the strap of the satchel tighter. At last, she whispered, "Clara." The name sounded fragile in the stale air, like it hadn't been spoken in a long time. Elias nodded slowly, rolling it over in his mind. "Clara." He leaned against the doorframe, folding his arms. "How long you been living here, Clara?" Her gaze flicked toward the floorboards, then back at him. "Since before the others left." The others. Elias caught the way her voice cracked slightly on that word. He didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he let his eyes sweep the room. A thin blanket lay in the corner, bundled like a nest. A tin cup sat beside it, a crust of dried water inside. A cracked lantern rested on the windowsill. This wasn't a place someone passed through. This was survival. Clara shifted her weight, still watching him like a cornered animal. "You should go," she said softly. "This house doesn't want you." Elias's brow furrowed. He had heard men in town mutter about curses, about the land itself being poisoned, but he wasn't the kind to believe in ghost stories. What unsettled him wasn't her words. It was the way she said them, as if she knew the truth of it. He straightened, brushing the dust from his coat. "I bought this place for silence. I didn't plan on finding anyone here, but I ain't leaving. Clara." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She hugged the satchel closer. For a heartbeat, Elias thought she might bolt. Instead, she whispered something he almost didn't catch. "They'll come back." Elias tilted his head. "Who?" Her eyes darted to the window, out toward the empty fields where the sun was bleeding into the horizon. The silence stretched until he wondered if she'd answer at all. Then she spoke again. "The men who took everything." Elias felt the words settle heavy in his chest. He didn't ask more. Not yet. He could see the tremor in her hands, the way she tried to mask it with strength. This was no tale for the first meeting. Instead, he said, "You hungry?" Her eyes flicked back to his, wary, suspicious. He reached into his saddlebag, pulled out a strip of dried jerky, and set it on the windowsill. He didn't push it toward her, didn't coax, just left it there. Clara's eyes followed every movement, but she didn't reach for it. Not yet. Elias stepped back toward the doorway. "You can stay upstairs. I'll keep to the ground floor. But this place, it's big enough for the both of us." Her silence followed him down the stairs. Only when he reached the bottom did he hear the faintest sound behind him, the crinkle of paper as she finally loosened her grip on the satchel to take the food. That night, Elias lit a single lantern in the main room. Shadows stretched long, across the cracked walls. He sat in a chair that groaned under his weight, staring at the dying flame. Upstairs he could hear her footsteps, small, measured, never straying too far from the corner of her room. The ranch creaked and sighed around them, as though adjusting to the presence of two souls instead of none. Outside, the wind rose, carrying with it a strange sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a whistle. Almost. Voices. Elias Crow had bought a ranch for silence, but what he found inside was a girl who whispered of men that might return. And as he sat there in the dim light, hand resting on the revolver, at his side, one thought pressed against him harder than the dust or the wind. This place was not empty. It had never been empty. The second morning at the ranch came gray and thin. The sun tried to climb over the horizon, but the light was dull, as though even the sky had grown tired of shining on this land. Elias Crow stepped outside, boots sinking into the brittle dirt, and breathed in the stale air. He scanned the horizon like a soldier still expecting an ambush. The place felt wrong. Not broken in the way of an old barn or an abandoned field. Wrong in a way that clung to him, like unseen eyes watched every step he took. The silence here wasn't silence at all. It was the sound of something holding its breath. He walked to the well. The boards that sealed it looked older than the house itself, gray with rot. He crouched down, ran his hand across them, and felt a chill. The air seeping out of the cracks wasn't warm, wasn't dry. It was cold, too cold for the season. He pulled his hand back sharply, standing to his full height. Behind him, he heard the faint scuff of feet. Clara. She stood barefoot in the dust, hair tangled, clutching her satchel again like it was the only anchor she had. Her eyes fixed on him, unblinking. "Don't touch it," she said. Elias tilted his head. "The well?" Her lips pressed thin, and she gave the slightest nod. "Why?" She looked past him, toward the boards, as though speaking to them instead of him. "Because that's where they put them." Elias frowned, but before he could ask, she turned and walked back toward the house, her steps quick and sharp, as if she had already said too much. That evening, Elias tried to make the place livable. He repaired what he could, patched a hole in the barn roof with spare planks, cleared broken glass from the floor, and nailed boards across the door to keep the wind from howling through. But every nail he hammered only seemed to make the ranch groan louder, as though it resented his attempts to heal it. Inside, Clara lingered upstairs, rarely speaking. She moved like a ghost, quiet but ever present. Only once did she break the silence. She appeared in the doorway as Elias sat sharpening his knife by lantern light. "You shouldn't stay here," she whispered. Elias didn't look up. The rasp of metal against stone filled the pause. I paid for this place. It's mine now." Clara stepped further into the light. Her face looked pale, eyes ringed with sleepless shadows. "They'll come back. They always come back." This time, Elias set down the knife. His gaze locked onto hers. "Who are they?" Her voice shook, but her words did not falter. "The men who killed my family. The ones who filled that well." The air seemed to thin between them. Elias felt the weight of the revolver at his side. He didn't doubt her, not entirely. There was something in her tone, a truth carved too deep for a girl her age to carry unless she had lived it. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "When was this?" Her fingers gripped the satchel tighter. She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes glistened, and for the first time Elias saw the child beneath the steel. She blinked hard, turning her face away before any tears could fall. Long. Enough that nobody remembers but me. Elias leaned back, exhaling slowly. The room was heavy now, filled not just with shadows but with the weight of what lingered in the soil, in the wood, in the very silence of this house. Later that night, as Elias tried to sleep in the downstairs room, he heard it again. The voices. At first, he thought it was the wind, slipping through cracks in the boards. But the longer he listened, the clearer they became. Murmurs, whispers, words he couldn't quite catch, rising and falling like prayers, or curses. He sat up in his bedroll, hand reaching for the revolver. His eyes scanned the dark room, the lantern long since gone out. His breath came slow, deliberate, but his pulse hammered in his ears. And then, footsteps, soft, slow, coming from above. He rose, climbed the stairs, and pushed open Clara's door. She sat in the corner, clutching her satchel, wide awake. "You hear it too," she said. "Not a question. A statement." Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't answer, but he didn't need to, because for the first time, he realized this ranch wasn't just haunted by Clara's past. It was haunted by something far older. By the fourth day, the ranch felt different. Not alive, not safe, never that. But different. Where once the silence had been hollow, now it carried weight. Clara moved through the halls like she belonged there, and Elias found himself watching her more closely than he cared to admit. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried more than most men's speeches. At dawn, Elias found her sitting on the porch steps, the satchel at her side, staring out at the dying fields. The air was cold, the sky pale and washed, but she didn't shiver. "You always sit out here?" he asked, adjusting the brim of his hat against the light. She didn't look at him. "I listen." "For what?" Her gaze stayed on the horizon. "For them." Elias's jaw tightened. He wanted to ask again who they were, what had really happened here, but he could see the way her fingers dug into the satchel strap, the way her shoulders stiffened, and he let the question die on his tongue. Instead, he said, "If they come, you won't be alone." Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and suspicious. Then, after a pause, she nodded once, the smallest concession of trust. That day, Elias worked the land, though it felt less like work and more like a battle. The soil was stubborn, the fences broken, the barn barely standing. But still he pushed, because to do nothing would mean letting the ghosts win. Clara lingered at the edge of his vision, always watching, never interfering. At dusk, as the sun bled across the sky, Elias noticed something strange. A column of smoke, faint and distant, curling up against the horizon to the east. Too thin for a wildfire, too steady for accident. A campfire. He narrowed his eyes. Men. That night he sat at the table sharpening his knife, the rasp of steel against stone filling the room. Clara sat across from him, lantern light flickering across her face. She hadn't touched the food he set out. Her eyes kept drifting toward the window. Finally, she spoke. "They found us." Elias's hand stilled. He looked up slowly. "You know who they are?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They wore red sashes. Always red. They rode in the night, killed my father first, then my mother. Took everything, laughed while they filled the well." Her breath trembled. "I hid. They never found me." Elias stared at her, the knife forgotten in his hand. He had seen men like that before. Riders who carried cruelty like a badge, who left blood not for profit but for sport, the kind who believed fear itself was power. "How many?" he asked. Her eyes glistened in the lantern glow. 6. Maybe 7. Elias leaned back, exhaling slow, steady, as if to keep his own ghosts from clawing through his chest. He knew the type. Men who didn't stop. Men who came back for what they thought belonged to them. Clara's voice broke the silence. "You'll leave, won't you? Just like the others did." Elias's eyes hardened. "I'm not the others." Her gaze searched his face as though testing the truth of his words. After a long moment, she looked down at the satchel and whispered, "Then you'll die here." That night, Elias didn't sleep. He sat by the window, revolver across his lap, watching the horizon. The smoke was gone, but the feeling lingered, heavier than the dust in his lungs. Near midnight, the ranch groaned, with the wind. But beneath it, Elias heard something else. Hoofbeats, distant, slow, like thunder crawling across the earth. He rose, lantern dimmed, and peered into the night. Shadows moved along the ridgeline, too far to count but close enough to know they were no dream. Behind him, Clara appeared in the doorway, her bare feet silent against the floor. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with something fierce. "They've come back." Elias Crow tightened his grip on the revolver. His jaw set, like iron. The ranch he bought for $1 was about to cost him blood. The night they came back was the kind of night when the wind doesn't blow, when even the crickets fall silent, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. Elias Crow sat in the dark with his revolver across his lap, the faint glow of the dying lantern painting his face in half-shadow. Clara sat upstairs, back pressed against the wall, clutching her satchel the way a drowning soul clutches driftwood. Then the hoofbeats came. Slow at first, steady, then louder. Many horses. The kind of rhythm that shakes through your bones before your ears can catch it. Elias rose from his chair, stepped to the window, and peered into the darkness. Figures. 6. No, 7. Men on horseback, riding slow, deliberate, as if they owned the night. Each one bore a strip of red cloth tied somewhere, the arm, the neck, the saddle horn. Red that looked black in the moonlight but carried the memory of blood. They reined up just beyond the gates, shadows against the stars. For a long moment they didn't move, didn't speak, just sat there, mounted, watching the house. Elias's fingers tightened around the revolver's grip. He felt the weight of every mile that had led him here pressing against his shoulders. Finally, one of them called out, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "House looks better than I remember." Laughter followed, dry, cruel, the kind that carried the memory of screams. Clara, upstairs, pressed her palms against her ears, but the sound still reached her. Elias stepped outside. The boards of the porch groaned under his boots. He stood tall, hat low, revolver at his side but not yet raised. "This place is mine now," he said, his voice low but steady. "Paid for it. County says so." The leader of the riders chuckled, spitting into the dirt. "County don't matter. Here. Blood does, and there's blood in that well that says otherwise." Elias's jaw tightened. His eyes swept across the men, noting how they sat their horses, how their hands twitched near their weapons. He had fought men like this before, He knew how it would end. "You've got one chance," Elias said flatly. "Turn around, ride back the way you came." Another burst of laughter, meaner this time. The leader leaned forward in his saddle, the red sash around his neck fluttering in the night breeze. "You alone, Crow? Or did the ghost of that family come back to keep you company?" A window creaked upstairs. Clara's face appeared in the shadows, pale and defiant. The riders saw her. The laughter stopped. Silence fell heavy. "Well," the leader drawled, voice dripping with menace, "ain't that a surprise?" Elias didn't look back, but he felt the air shift. The girl had been their unfinished work, the one they hadn't managed to erase. Now they saw her alive, standing in the window of the house they thought belonged to their cruelty. "You should have stayed hidden, little rabbit," one of the men sneered. "Now we'll finish it proper." Elias drew his revolver. The sound of the hammer cocking cracked the silence like thunder. "Not tonight," he said. The first shot came fast, splitting the night wide open. A rider toppled backward off his horse, hitting the dirt with a thud that echoed across the barren land. Chaos erupted. Horses reared. Men cursed. Gunfire lit the dark like lightning. Elias moved with the precision of a man who had lived too long in the company of death. He fired, shifted, fired again, every shot measured, every step deliberate. A bullet grazed his shoulder, burning hot, but he didn't falter. From the porch, Clara screamed. Not in fear, but in fury. She clutched her satchel, then ran downstairs, barefoot on the boards. Elias shouted for her to stay back, but she didn't listen. From the bag, she pulled a rusted rifle, the wood worn smooth from years of hiding. She braced it against the doorframe, eyes blazing. Her first shot missed wide, the recoil nearly knocking her down. But the second found a man's chest, and he fell clutching at the red sash around his neck, eyes wide with disbelief. "Teen," riders faltered. They had expected fear. What they found was resistance. But they weren't done. Two men dismounted, rushing the porch with knives gleaming. Elias met them head-on. His revolver empty, he swung it like a hammer, cracking one across the jaw, then drew his knife with his other hand. Steel met flesh. Blood sprayed across the porch boards. The second man gurgled and fell, clutching at the wound in his throat. Clara fired again, the crack of the rifle splitting the chaos. Another rider fell from his horse, the last of them pulled. Back, eyes wide, rage twisting into something colder, fear. The leader snarled, spurring his horse forward. He raised his revolver, aimed straight at Clara. Time slowed. Elias saw it, the flash of steel, the intent. He threw himself forward, firing his last bullet. The shot ripped through the leader's chest. The man's face twisted, red sash fluttering, as he tumbled from the saddle, hitting the ground with a hollow thud. Silence. The night went still. The horses of the dead and dying scattered, their hooves drumming against the earth as they fled. Smoke hung in the air, mingling with dust and blood. Elias stood on the porch, chest heaving, blood dripping from the cut on his shoulder. Clara lowered the rifle, her small hands trembling, her eyes locked on the bodies sprawled across the yard. It was over. For now. Elias turned to her, voice rough, broken. "You did good." Clara looked at him, her lips parting as if to speak. But no, words came. Instead, she clutched the rifle tighter, her gaze shifting toward the well, toward the boards that sealed it. "They're not all gone," she whispered. Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" Her eyes didn't leave the well. "The ones who fell before. They're still here." The wind picked up, howling through the broken fences, carrying with it a sound Elias swore he'd heard before, the faintest echo of voices, rising from the earth itself. The ranch had been bought for $1, but tonight it had been paid. For in blood, and as Elias Crow and Clara stood amid the silence, both knew the truth. This land was theirs now, but the dead were not done with them yet.